Okay, so it's a new day, it's a bit lighter, it's a bit warmer in here, which is always good. I think it must be part 3 of the frame build that we're doing now. So we are going to continue with, or we're going to start the bridle joint in the top left corner and the through tenon in the bottom right. Right, so before I get started, worth noting that the bridle joint, again, I'm going to kind of skim over it, but not too much because I have done a previous video on cutting one of these. Link is up here if you want to view that and you want to see it more in depth. So I'm going to skim over that. However, for the through tenon, it's going to kind of be skimmed over because I covered a lot of it in my previous mortise and tenon video. Link up here for that again. But there is going to be a few subtle differences because this one is a through tenon, so I'll make sure that I explain that when it comes to it. So let's start with the bridle joint, shall we? Okay, so if you watched part 1, you'll know that we've already scratched in these lines here, and these are in perfect alignment with the lap joint, which is on the opposite board. If you haven't watched part 1, you're probably going to be a bit lost by this point, so be sure to watch that if you've just come here out of nowhere. Hello if you have. But we're going to cut almost to these lines. I'm going to cut about 1 millimeter away with my saw here, and we're going to cut back to that with the chisel later on. And then similar to the halving joint, we're just going to do one right in the middle as well to weaken the grain. Make sure you're going right down to the baseline on both sides of this because that'll make chiseling a lot easier later on. Okay, and now I'll just do that to the other side and we'll split it off later. Okay, and then with our 3 cuts on each side, I can simply halve the material of my chisel and crack it off. So again, I'm getting as close to that baseline as possible before committing to it. So now I'm about 1 millimeter to 1/2 millimeter away from it. Right, and then just check these saw cuts have gone all the way to the baseline. So they have there. Chisel in the baseline. Et voila. So I'm going to do that to the other side now. Okay, so with one part of the bridle joint roughed out, I'm going to start roughing out the other one. So cut out the waste on this component here. Again, I'm not quite going to that line. I'm going to chisel back to it later. Okay, and then cut out the waste. Voila! The mic died in that last clip, but what I've done is gone in from all 3 edges, established the line so it looks a little bit of a mess in the middle, but round the outside that is bang on the marking gauge line, so I know that's exactly where it needs to be. I just need to clear this stuff out the middle. So I've got it upright in the vise at the moment so I can look down into it, and I'm just going to pare across with my chisel. And in doing so, I'm being sure not to hit any of these lines that I've already cut. So I've flipped it around and working from the other side now. So now I'm just putting the back of the chisel against the cheeks in here to see if I can get it to rock on any high points in the middle. Just making sure that it's touching both this edge and this edge, which it is. It's got a little bit of something in the bottom of here. There it is. Okay, right, I reckon we can start cleaning up this baseline now. Right, and now down to this shoulder line. So again, halving the material until I can't halve it anymore. Okay, that's about as close as I'm going to get. So now chisel in the baseline. Got to clean out some bits in the corner because the chisel isn't quite the same size. Flip it over. Okay, and then I've just got these little bits here to get rid of now. So I'm just going to sever the fibres so they don't continue splitting below the baseline. Right, so now we have got this bit of the bridle joint all cleaned out and ready to go. We've just got to clean up the mess that's left over here. So you got a few options here. You could either go in here with a chisel and get rid of that lump that's left in the middle after we establish these outer lines. Check to see if you've got any bumps in there with a ruler, take them out, and voila, you're ready to go. The other option is to get a shoulder plane and plane across it like that in order to take out any small bumps in there. That's another great option. Or get yourself a router plane. So what I'm going to do is start off with the router plane, get rid of all the bumps and stuff in the middle, and then I'm going to fine tune it with a shoulder plane at the bottom, because I find to get a little bit more control from the shoulder plane rather than just whack this thing through it. So that's how I'm going to do it. So I've set the router plane to not quite hit the baseline here, but it's going to take off all this rubbish here. If you are new to this channel, I do a series called Tool Duel, where I compare two tools of a similar specification, I suppose. And I did one on router planes comparing the Veritas router plane and the Lie-Nielsen router plane. So I'll put the link up here for that. So if you're stuck between what tools to buy, that series might help. So let's get rid of all this rubbish. There we go, I reckon that's about as far as I'll go with that. I'll just flip it over, we'll do this other side. God, this is a bit of a mess here, isn't it? Right, and now let's shoulder plane it flat. Oh, sod it, I'm going to go back to the chisel, it's quicker. Then, as you'd expect, chisel in these lines here, and we'll chop those down. Okay, I'll just do the same on the other side and we'll see how it fits. So let's check the result we got from this. So face side out, face side out. It's pretty good. Got a tiny line there, although I think some of that is actually pencil from where I drew on there originally. When we glue it up at the end, we'll plane that off and see what it looks like, but otherwise on the end here, that looks really good. We'll probably put a clamp across here just to really press it in. Cool. Right, so now we will go on to the through tenon joint on the final corner. Now, with this one, my plan for this is to go from the inside face and mortise down as far as I can with the mortise chisel. And then on the opposite face here, I'm going to go in with a smaller chisel that isn't the same width as these walls here, break through to meet up with the hole that I've done on here, and then pare away back to these lines with my bevel edge chisel so that I get a nice crisp joint on the outside here. I'm not going to risk getting any sort of bruising around the outside like I would from a mortise chisel. So that's how I'm going to attack this. We'll see how we get on. Right, so mortise chisel precisely between those lines. And if you remember at the start, we spaced these lines to be exactly the same width as the chisel. So no need for overhanging it here. Now I'm going to shift back and use the bevel of the chisel to push the waste into that gap. Now I'm going to leave some material at the end here so that I can lever this waste out and damage that material instead of the shoulder line here. You can see now why I've left all this material here. It is really starting to crumble now. Right, let's just check our depth of this now. So chisel in there, bit of masking tape around it, like that. That's our depth stop. And then down the front here, you can see that we're about 1 centimetre away from the bottom. So I'm going to give it a little bit more, not too much, because I don't want to start smashing through the other side, because that would be pretty catastrophic. In fact, I'm going to reset a depth stop so I can see exactly how far I need to get going. Right, so we've pretty much hit the masking tape depth stop, and that tells me that I'm about 5 millimeters from blowing out the other end. So that's as daring as I'm feeling today. I'm going to flip it over. Thank God it hasn't split on the opposite side. Now I'm going to get my 6 millimeter chisel right in the middle between those lines to make sure it's not hitting anything, and see what happens. Okay, so now I'm about around 1 millimetre away from each of those lines, so I'm just going to carefully work my way back and get the edge of these nice and crisp. Right, so now I'm just getting a square from the inside face of the through tenon and just checking that it is hitting the outside wall. So then that shows that there's no bumps or anything in the middle. There's one there. So let's try it on the other side. Okay, it's all good there and all good there. So if I find any bumps like I have just there, in fact, I'm going to get that out now. Yeah, I can see it there. So I'm just going to pare that out very carefully. Just get rid of any of the fluff that's left over. There we go. Right, so all good there, all good there. Yeah. Right, so that mortise should be all good. There's a few bits inside that are sort of a bit messy, I suppose, but those could serve a purpose later on when we fit the tenon in, because they could help snug it up in there. So I'll leave that as is, and now we'll get cutting out the tenon. Right, so now to cut the tenon. Now I'm going to do this with my Japanese saw again, because that's able to get the full depth, and it's a little bit finer than my tenon saw, so I tend to prefer it for smaller work like this. So I'm going to start on the back edge. Okay, so that's one option, just do it freehand, or I mentioned it in a previous video, I've got a Katz-Moses dovetail guide here, and this actually has a shoulder section on it, which you could also use for little tenons like this. So if I put that up against the line that I want to cut to, I can simply put the saw on the side. Then once it bottoms out on top here, take it off. Right, and then flip it around and do these long sides. And then obviously we'll chisel back to the shoulder line. Right, and now fitting this into the mortise, this is the inside of it. So I'd imagine, yeah. So because this has been bruised by the chisel quite a lot, that is able to fit in there straight away, even though I haven't quite gone to the lines on here. Whereas on the outside, I could try and push that in, but it's probably going to start bruising these walls, so I don't really want to do that. So what I'm going to do, because I want this to be as clean as possible on the outside joint, I'm going to plane down this outside edge until it fits in the outside of this through tenon really snug, and then leave it. As soon as that fits in there from top to bottom and side to side, I don't need to do anything else with that. The only thing I would need to do is plane down some of this meat here in order to fit it into the tenon and make it bottom out completely. So I'm going to get a shoulder plane to get this down first. So I've got my shoulder plane set up for a really fine cut, and what I'm going to do is work down to these lines, but not go straight down to them immediately, because the edge of the mortises might be slightly bruised and I'll need to cut this tenon a little bit bigger. So at the moment on this side we're about 1/4 millimetre away, and here we're about 1/2 millimetre away. So I'm going to take it all down to about 1/4 mil away. You don't need to measure it, I'm just sort of doing this by eye. And I'm sort of going off the front here to prevent blowing out this side, because if that corner breaks off, you're going to see that in the joint obviously. So if I go diagonally here, it's less of a chance of smashing that off. So again, the only thing I'm doing here is making sure it's going to fit on the outside mortise, so where the through tenon is exposed. Then I can tend to all of this later. Okay, and so now the tenon should just sort of, there you go, so it just sort of snugs up in there, so it is a perfect fit all the way around. So that means as it comes through from the other side, it is going to fit in here perfectly, because this is the outside joint. And now all I have to do is focus on fitting this area here and getting that nice and snug in the mortise. So I'm going to clamp it up and do that with the shoulder plane again. What I can do as I go, just sort of scribble some pencil marks on there like that, and on that edge. And then I can get the mortise, make sure it's going in the correct way, and just try and fit that in there. So you see, it's starting to go in, but it's snagging somewhere. It's obviously very difficult to work that out, so you can take it out, then you can look at the pencil marks, you see it's burnished on there, It's burnished a lot more there than it is there, so that means this side is higher. The edges here, yeah, a little bit. And that, yeah, so a bit of a high spot on there as well. So now I know where to take down. So obviously I'm not going right to the edge because that edge was correct. This area behind it, we can take a bit of meat out of there. Okay, and then these bits are a little bit high as well. And this side looks to be the offending part. That's really heavily burnished there. Okay, right, so that's snugged up again. Let's work out where that was. Looks all good on here. We got a little bit of shininess there, but it's not really rubbing off a lot of those pen marks, so I would say it's all right top to bottom. Looks to be just these edges. Very almost there. Let's see. So if this doesn't go in, I reckon it will be the mortice that we have a problem with. Oh, come on. Right, so that has bottomed out in there, which is all good. Got a few little gaps on there, which is kind of inevitable with a through tenon, but when we glue it, when we start planing, some of these gaps will be filled up, so that's not too bad. Shoulder line here hasn't quite closed up, but I think with a cramp on there, that will be just fine. Let's assemble it up and see what it looks like. Right, so how's the best way to do this? One, that can go in there. So dovetail joint in, let's get the lap joint in, so 3 and 4, yep. Okay, and then we should just be able to slot should just be able to slot these together. So through tenon lined up on there, bridle joint lined up. Cool, right, so there you go, it's all together. It's looking all good on there. So I think we'll get this all glued up, and then tomorrow, because it's getting pretty cold, pretty dark in here right now, we'll plane it all up and see how it looks. So we're just going to do a quick dry fit to start with. So no point clamping these like straight on the ends like that, because these components are overhanging, so effectively all you're doing is clamping this long ways. You're not actually pressing these in. So I am going to put them on the inside like this, and that's going to press the shoulder lines on the edges here into these components. So that's going to hide any gaps underneath here, which it has. So that side's all good. Let's get another one. So this mortise and tenon wasn't closing up just now, and let's have a look at it now. Still a small gap, so I'm going to check that out once we disassemble it. And I've just got these little cramps here to press the joints together. And on the mortise and tenon here, I'm going to put one sort of towards the outside because it might actually deflect those walls a little bit and help close up some of the gaps on the outside, so we'll do that. So I'm just going to tinker with the small gap on the mortise and tenon here on the back. It's probably the fact that the shoulder is sloping upwards a little bit, and I just need to undercut it a little bit more, so I won't bother filming it. It's nice and easy to fix. So I'll see you when we're ready to glue it up. Now, upon changing the shoulder on the back of the tenon, which is all now fine, it was a slight overcut on there. Overcut, I never know the term for it. Basically, I had to lower the shoulder a little bit because it was hitting a high spot in the middle. So that is all closing up now, but what I've just realized is on the plans that I completely forgot to do the chamfers on the left-hand side of the frame. So those are 6mm in and 6mm down. So on this Veritas marking gauge, I've got some small measurements that I can simply lock the stock to, and now I can score 6mm on the side of these. So 3, it's going to be on this side because it's the bottom component. So along the end here, light score to start with, and then increase it. Now on this bottom component, I've actually started getting some checks in it, most likely from where the timber's been dried a little bit dodgy. So this could be interesting. Hopefully I don't end up breaking anything off. It's an incentive to have a nice sharp plane here. So 6mm all the way around, and then we need to do 6mm on the end grain as well. 3 down like that on there, 1 up here. There we go, right, so we're going to pop this in the, let's see, tail vise, leg vise. I don't know, you'll see in the next camera shot. Right, so I've got the component clamped at 45 degrees in the vise. I think I just need to shift it over a bit more. There we go. And now I can see both the lines on either side. Now, if you go straight on like this, you might end up breaking out this back edge. So what I would say is just slightly skew your block plane so that you're going at an angle, and then it will shear the wood off the end here. You want to make sure that you're removing the chamfer evenly. You don't want to start taking down more on the back than you do on the front because it's a little bit more difficult to adjust. And check your progress down to each line and make sure that that is going down evenly as well. So here you might be able to see that I'm approaching the line on the left a little bit quicker than I am on the right, so this will become more apparent as you get closer to them. So at this point I need to start transferring my pressure on the block plane to make sure I'm progressing evenly and going to hit those baselines at the same time. So I'm going to get it resting on that existing 45 and then just tilt it ever so slightly to the right. It'll only take a few passes before you create a new 45. So I think I might have overclocked it there, so I'm going to tilt it back the other way. Yeah, that looks spot on. So now I can just rest it on that 45. Okay, now flip it over. We'll do exactly the same on all 7 other sides. So you've got to make sure that your plane is balanced this way as well as it is this way, because it's quite easy to rock either way. So just sort of get it located on there as much as you can, so rocking it front to back until you feel it hit it level. Tilt the plane. So as you get going, you can take the plane away and just see if it's hitting one side heavier than the other. So it's looking pretty good. Right, so to glue this together, I am going to use Cascamite. Now this is what I used to build this workbench actually. It's what all of these laminates are held together with, and I love this glue for a few reasons. Firstly, it's got a very long open time, around about 40 minutes on it, so you've got a lot of time to clamp up components. Secondly, it dries the same colour as this, ash, beech. You don't get any of those horrible yellow joints or black joints that you would from certain glues. And thirdly, I shouldn't really admit this, but it is gap filling, which is quite good. So in the example of this through tenon, where I had a few small gaps around here, it will fill those to an extent. It doesn't do wonders, but it does fill any small gaps. And obviously the fact it's the same colour as timber is also a great benefit. And another reason it helps to fill gaps is because you mix this with water. So this actually comes in a powder form, kind of like icing sugar. You mix it with water, and then because it's water-based, it is going to expand the wood ever so slightly, thus helping you fill more gaps. So I have got an old Cascamite tub here, which I'm going to mix it in. I don't have any sort of scoopy device, so I'm just going to sort of pour this in here. You can do this with certain measurements, but I kind of just do it by eye by this point. So I don't know, around that much. That's plenty. I went through so much of this when doing all of these laminates. Right, so a bit of water. It's just going to be from my spray bottle. Now on the back of the Cascamite tub, there is unit measurements. I think it's done by weight or volume. I can't remember exactly. I just tend to do this by the look of it. So I've got a spoon left over from a meal deal that I had earlier. What you don't want to do is pour all of the water in to start with. You want to do it a little bit at a time. So tiny bit in there and just mix it around a bit. And obviously just cover all of my components in it. You know, I'm going to use the other end of the spoon for, oh dear, this is just, oh, what a shambles. Right, so that's started clumping up in there a bit, so we need to add a little bit more water. Yeah, this spoon really isn't working great. It's bending all over the place. Just use the glue stick instead. So you're kind of mixing this up to be the same consistency as custard, I suppose. You just got to keep going until all of the clumps in there dissolve. You see how little I'm adding at a time? You don't want to just pour it all straight in. What we used to do at Rykerwood with this to mix it up is put a whisk in the end of a drill. That went. Mixed it up so well. This is a little bit more tedious, so you want to make sure you make enough to start with, because you don't want to be mixing this up halfway through a glue up. So that's looking like a pretty good consistency, so let's get all these laid out. So in the bottom of the dovetail joint, I'm going to put it up the walls as well. The bridle joint. Let's just get that dovetail joint in place now. I'm going to do some on the back of the tail, again a little bit on the sides, don't need too much. This stuff doesn't soak into endgrain as much as like tight bond and things like that I've found, so it is worth putting it on there as well. And obviously the gap filling properties always helps. And I hear a lot of you are probably cringing at the fact that I'm doing this on my workbench. It's water based, I can wipe it off at the end. This workbench is finished in Osmo, which will also prevent glue from sticking to it. So do not worry, it's all fine. So that's already tightened it up, so that's the water-based aspect of it. Okay, and then the mortise and tenon, let's see, let's just get some in the entry bit here. So then as I press the tenon in, it's going to push it towards the outside and spread it all along the inside as well. And I'll just paint the end of this tenon as well. You see, with such a long open time on this, you really don't need to stress about it too much. You can really take your time with it. Also, this workshop's relatively cold, so that's going to slow it down even more. If you're in a hot workshop, the drying time of this can speed up to that of a tight bond, so around 20 minutes or so, but then tight bond, if it was in a hot workshop, would probably start going off in 10. That's all done, and then the last bit I've got to do is just get in this bridle joint here. So I'm just going to sort of put it at the end, as I did on the mortise joint, and then it'll all spread down as I press it in. Just see if I can get some on the bottom there, so that when the shoulder presses in, it'll all close up. Oh, big dollop on the workbench there. I will clean it off, don't worry. So make sure it's assembled the right way. So bridle joint, mortise joint. So that's on there. There you go, so it has already snugged up. Oh, yeah. That's the water expanding the joints. So we'll press it in with the clamps. That's not ideal. I do really need to make an insert for that bit on my workbench at some point. Just going to put a little bit in the end of the mortise here. Whoa, almost again. Oh, this is an incentive to fix this. Right, now let's clamp all the joints together. So on the outside here, I was going to put one just to see if I could close up any joints on there. Any joints, any gaps on the joint. Okay, so what I'll do at this point is get a little 6-inch ruler, put a rag over the end of it, put a bit of water on that, and then use that to scrape out all the glue in the corners, just to make it a bit easier to clean up later on. Right, there we go. Now let's wipe off all of the stuff on top of these joints. This Cascamite dries quite brittle, so it is a little bit horrible to get off. So it's always worth doing that now. I learned that the hard way when building the workbench. I had lots of squeeze out between these layers, and my God, thank God I had access to the industrial drum sander, because that would have just been an absolute nightmare. And these bits on the end I'll clean up as best as I can, but I'll be planing those flush anyway. Right, put that aside to dry. Right, and now I'll go home and have some dinner. I'm joking, I wouldn't do that to my workbench. I'm joking, don't worry. See, look, comes straight off, no fuss. There we go. That is all glued up, ready to be planed flush tomorrow when it all dries up. So what I'm going to do is leave the Cascamite, or the excess Cascamite, in this pot here. Then in the morning I can check this pot to check that it's fully hardened, and then I know everything inside these joints are. Usually it takes around, in my experience, around about 6 hours to dry off completely, or before you can start using it. But like most glues, you want to leave it a full 24 hours before you really start stressing it. So yeah, that's all for part 3. I will see you in part 4 when it comes to cleaning it up. See you then.